Some countries were shaped by roads, some by trade routes, some by great cities. Guyana was shaped by rivers and forest. For centuries, the dense wilderness covering most of the country acted as both protector and barrier. It slowed expansion, limited settlement, and kept enormous areas remarkably untouched by the kind of development that transformed much of the modern world. Even today, vast sections of the interior remain difficult to access. The forest stretches across mountains, savannas, wetlands, and river systems that seem to continue forever. Villages appear suddenly along riverbanks. Boats emerge from the mist. Small aircraft connect places that roads never reached. And beyond them lies more wilderness than many countries possess in their entirety. This is not a story about a country surrounded by nature. It is a story about a country existing within it. A place where human life has learned to adapt to one of the largest and most intact natural landscapes left in South America. Subscribe for more travel documentaries from the most remote corners of the planet, and drop a comment. Where are you watching from? The country Guyana sits on the northeastern shoulder of South America, bordered by Venezuela, Brazil, and Suriname. It is smaller than many countries on the continent. But size here is misleading. The coastline where the capital Georgetown sits holds the majority of the population. Most of the country's roughly 800,000 people live pressed against a thin strip of coastal land that was drained, diked, and reclaimed from the sea centuries ago by colonial hands. Behind that coast, the country opens differently. Savannas first, then forest, then more forest. Then forest so dense and unbroken that from the air it becomes almost impossible to understand where one river ends and another begins. The interior is a different country entirely. It is the land of the Rupununi wetlands, where grasslands flood seasonally and jaguars walk routes no road follows. It is the land of the Pacaraima Mountains, where flat-topped tepus rise from the green like geological accidents, ancient and indifferent. It is the land of the Essequibo, one of the great rivers of South America, running wide and powerful through territories where the colonial grid never fully arrived. Out here, the rules that govern coastal Guyana do not apply. New rules replace them, older rules. The forest. Before anything else, there is the forest. It is important to understand what the Guyanese interior forest actually is. Not as a concept, but as a physical environment that shapes every decision, every movement, every system of life within it. This is not decorative forest. Not the kind that surrounds a city park or lines a country road. This is closed canopy rainforest, layered and competitive, where trees compete for light across decades, where the understory runs dark even at midday, where the density of life per square meter exceeds almost anything in the temperate world, and where that same density makes navigation, construction, agriculture, and travel fundamentally different propositions than they are in open terrain. The forest controls moisture. It produces its own rainfall through transpiration, cycling water through leaves and returning it to the atmosphere in volumes that influence weather far beyond its borders. It controls temperature. Inside the canopy, the air is cooler, more stable, more humid than the exposed ground outside it. It controls sound, not by creating silence. The forest is never silent, but by absorbing, muffling, and disorienting it. A chainsaw half a kilometer away can sound uncertain. A community can remain acoustically invisible to those not already near it. Most importantly, the forest controls access. There are no straight lines here, no clear sight lines, no logical grid for roads to follow. Rivers are the highways, creeks are the side streets. And on foot, movement through dense forest is measured not in kilometers, but in hours. In machete swings, in the management of mud, root systems, insects, and the overhead threat of falling branches known locally without romance as widowmakers. To live in the Guyanese interior is to live inside this system. Not beside it, inside it. The indigenous communities. Long before Guyana was a country, before it had borders or a name Europeans recognized, the interior was inhabited. It still is. The indigenous peoples of Guyana, among them the Wapishana, Makushi, Patamona, Waiwai, Arawak, Warao, and others, represent some of the longest-standing relationships between human communities and tropical forest environments anywhere on the continent. These are not populations that ended up in the forest by accident or isolation. They are peoples for whom the forest is the organizing principle of culture, economy, medicine, architecture, spirituality, and survival. They have been living in this landscape for thousands of years. That is not a sentimental observation. It is a technical one. Because the knowledge accumulated over that time is not folklore. It is operational intelligence. It includes, but is not limited to, an an understanding of which plants treat which conditions. Which rivers flood when and how far. Which soils support crops and which do not. Which animals travel which routes at which seasons, and how to build structures that remain functional in one of the wettest and most biologically aggressive environments on Earth. A village in the Guyanese interior is not a primitive settlement. It is a sophisticated human adaptation to a specific and demanding environment. Housing is elevated or reinforced against moisture. Crops are selected for what the soil and rainfall cycle actually support. Protein sources are managed across fish, game, and cultivated animals. Medicines come largely from what the surrounding forest provides. Because for much of the interior, a hospital remains a very long journey away. Community structure absorbs the demands of that reality. Labor is shared across households in ways that allow difficult tasks to become manageable ones. Knowledge is transmitted practically. Not through institutions, but through proximity, observation, and participation in work that cannot be postponed. And decisions about land, resources, and movement are made with an awareness of consequence that comes from genuinely depending on the land, not simply admiring it. There is no safety net of abstraction here. Decisions about planting, fishing, building, or travel meet their consequences directly. That sharpens thinking in ways that formal education occasionally neglects. The rivers, if the forest is the body of the Guyanese interior, the rivers are its circulatory system. They are everything. They are roads where no roads exist. They carry goods, people, information, and in some communities, they are the only reliable connection to the outside world. In a country where interior road infrastructure remains limited and aviation expensive, a river with a functioning boat is freedom. But rivers here are not passive channels. They have personalities, moods, and seasonal agendas. During the wet season, rivers expand dramatically. Lands that appeared solid weeks earlier become impassable. Communities on lower ground may find themselves effectively surrounded by water, not dangerously, necessarily, but completely. The world shrinks to what the water allows. During the dry season, some rivers drop far enough to make certain passages impossible from the other direction. A boat that moved freely in May may scrape bottom in September. The window of practical navigation on some waterways is surprisingly narrow. And these rivers are not empty. They carry black caiman, electric eels, piranha, not the cinematic monsters of popular imagination, but real animals that change how you move through water and what you must know before entering it. A person raised along these rivers knows things about them that a map cannot show, reading the surface for current behavior. Knowing which bends hide submerged hazards. Understanding what the color of the water on a given day is communicating. This is not exotic knowledge. It is local expertise. The kind that accumulates only through decades of living with something. Rain in Guyana is not an occasional event. It is a recurring structural pressure. The country experiences 2 wet seasons annually, and in the interior, precipitation does not ask permission. It arrives with volume and momentum, testing every surface, joint, foundation, and drainage system it encounters. Traditional building in the interior has evolved directly from this pressure. Structures are elevated on posts to manage both flooding and the moisture that rises from saturated ground. Roofs are steep and deep-eaved to push water outward and away from walls. Materials historically came entirely from the forest itself, specific hardwoods for structural members, selected for their resistance to rot and insect damage, and palm thatch for roofing, which when properly layered creates a surface that can manage extraordinary rainfall. There is a reason these design choices emerged. They were tested by centuries of failure and refinement. What remained was not aesthetic preference, it was what worked. Contemporary interior communities blend these approaches with available modern materials. Corrugated metal roofing has become widespread because its durability under tropical conditions is practical. Concrete block appears where it can be transported. Solar panels appear on rooftops that otherwise look entirely traditional. But even modernized structures must answer the same questions that drove the original designs. Can this manage the wet season? Will this still be standing after 2 more years of this humidity? What happens when the next storm is stronger than the last? The forest teaches humility through architecture. Every building here is a negotiation with decay. The jungle reclaims things, slowly, then all at once. And keeping ahead of that process is not a minor maintenance concern. It is an ongoing confrontation with one of the most aggressive ecosystems in the world. Food and the land, the interior of Guyana, is not easy farming country in the conventional sense. Beneath the forest, the soil holds a complicated secret. Despite supporting some of the most extravagant plant life on Earth, tropical forest soils are often surprisingly nutrient poor. The forest does not grow because the soil is rich. It grows because it has perfected the art of capturing and immediately recycling every scrap of nutrient that moves through it. The trees, the fungi, the decomposers, they form a closed loop so efficient that almost nothing escapes into the ground beneath. Clear the forest, and you break the loop. Within a few seasons, exposed soil exhausts itself. Indigenous agricultural systems understood this long before soil science named it. Shifting cultivation, often called slash and burn by those who misunderstand its logic, is actually a sophisticated land management technique developed specifically for forest environments. A plot is cleared and cultivated for a limited period. Then, it is allowed to return to forest. The community moves. The rested land regenerates. When cycles are long enough and populations small enough, the system is not destructive. It is adaptive. Cassava is the central crop of interior Guyana. It is resistant, calorie-dense, and productive in soils that defeat most other staples. It is processed into bread, into a fermented drink, into flour, into forms that preserve for varying lengths of time. An entire food culture has developed around one plant because that plant suits the conditions. Around it grow plantain, sweet potato, peanuts, pineapple, and various local vegetables grown in the small gardens attached to most households. Protein comes from the rivers as much as the land. Fishing here is not a recreational category. It is a food system. The rivers of the interior hold extraordinary biodiversity, hundreds of fish species, many of them regionally significant as food sources. Arapaima, the giant of South American freshwater fish. Various species of catfish. Peacock bass. The relationship between interior communities and their rivers' fish populations is intimate and generationally long, including knowledge of breeding seasons, movement patterns, and the locations of feeding areas that no government survey has ever formally documented. Hunting supplements both. Game remains available in the Guyanese interior in ways that have long disappeared from more accessible or heavily populated regions of South America. Deer, tapir, peccary, a range of birds, these are real parts of the food economy in remote communities, not romantic sidelines. All of it requires knowledge. What grows where? When the fish run? Which game is present in which season? How to read the forest floor for signs of passage. This is not knowledge that comes from books. It comes from being here, consistently, attentively, for a very long time. Getting anywhere. One of the most clarifying experiences available to a visitor in Guyana is simply trying to travel somewhere in the interior. Not as a tourist with a fixed plan and a booking confirmation, but as someone who actually needs to reach a specific community on a specific day. What becomes immediately obvious is that distance here is not measured in kilometers. It is measured in conditions. A settlement that sits 40 kilometers from the nearest airstrip might require a full day of river travel. Assuming the water is at the right level, the boat engine holds, and the weather does not make certain passages inadvisable. Overland, the same route might be physically impossible without specialized equipment, or possible in theory and catastrophic in practice. Seasonal variation changes everything. A path passable in September may be underwater in June. Internal flights serve some communities. Small aircraft, grass airstrips. Single pilots who know the terrain well enough to manage weather margins that would ground larger operations. These flights are not luxuries in the interior. They are the only reasonable option. When someone needs hospital care, when a child needs urgent medical attention, when supplies have been cut off longer than expected, it is often a small plane or nothing at all. The implications of that reality shape how communities think about health, risk, preparation, and the wisdom of managing medical situations before they become emergencies. For goods, the supply chain is a masterwork of improvisation. Items travel by whatever method the route currently permits. Boat segments connect to truck segments, connect to light aircraft, connects to foot. A bag of cement, a solar panel, a replacement engine part, or basic medical supplies might change hands 4 times between the coast and its destination. Each transfer determined by what the route currently allows rather than what any schedule anticipated. The people who live with this do not find it dramatic. They find it Tuesday. The Rupununi. There is a specific place in Guyana's interior that deserves its own mention, not because it is more important than the rest, but because it is different in a way that changes how you understand the country. The Rupununi is a vast savanna in southwest Guyana, bordered by the Amazon basin to the south and the Pacaraima highlands to the north and west. Seasonally flooded, enormous in scale, and astonishingly rich in wildlife, it is one of the last intact wetland savanna systems in South America. Here, the landscape opens. After the forest's enclosure, the Rupununi can feel physically disorienting. The sky is suddenly enormous. Distances that were measured in forest hours become visible, tangible. You can see where you are going, which is something that the forest does not easily permit. But the openness is deceptive. The Rupununi in wet season becomes a different place entirely. The grasslands fill with water. Caimans are suddenly everywhere. The movement of cattle and ranching is part of Rupununi life. An unusual presence in this part of the continent becomes a complicated seasonal negotiation with land that cannot decide if it is ground or river. Indigenous communities here, particularly the Makushi and Wapishana, have developed ways of living in this dual landscape, managing the dry season's heat and the wet season's flooding with the kind of practical fluency that only comes from long habitation. The Rupununi has also become a point of contact between traditional interior life and ecotourism, a relationship complicated enough to deserve much more space than this allows. Communities are navigating questions about what outside attention brings, what it costs, and who ultimately controls the terms of that contact. These are not small questions, and they are being asked in real time. What the interior asks anyone can fall in love with the idea of Guyana's interior. The photographs are extraordinary. The wildlife is extraordinary. The rivers and tepuis and unbroken forest canopy are the kinds of things that produce a specific emotion in people who encounter them, something between awe and relief that such places still exist. But living in the interior is not a photograph. It asks specific things of the people who do it. Physical endurance is one. Not the curated endurance of a gym or a hiking challenge, but the sustained physical engagement of a life where most tasks require a body, and most bodies are expected to perform them reliably across decades. Practical knowledge is another. How to manage a boat engine in a remote location. How to treat a wound when the nearest medical facility is a day's travel away. How to read weather well enough to make real decisions about it. How to stretch supplies across a period that is extended beyond its expected length. Patience with uncertainty is perhaps the least visible but most necessary quality. In a place where supply chains are improvised, weather is genuinely unpredictable, and communication infrastructure remains intermittent. The ability to function effectively without knowing exactly what happens next is not a personality trait. It is a survival skill. And then there is something harder to name, a willingness to accept the terms of the place rather than continually trying to rewrite them. The forest cannot be domesticated in any final sense. The rivers cannot be reliably scheduled. The animals move on their own logic. The seasons are not interested in convenience. The people who endure in the interior of Guyana understand something about negotiation that does not appear in business literature. Sometimes the other party simply cannot compromise. And you have to work with what it actually offers. The tension. Guyana is changing. The discovery of significant offshore oil reserves has transformed the country's economic trajectory in ways that are still unfolding. Money is arriving. Infrastructure is being discussed in terms that were not possible a decade ago. Georgetown is moving faster. Development conversations are happening at scales previously unimaginable for a country of Guyana's size. In the interior, these changes are felt differently. Some communities want roads. They want reliable access to healthcare, education, and economic opportunity that the coast has and the interior largely does not. To frame their desire for connection as a threat to some pristine wilderness is a position easier to hold from outside than from within a community where medical emergencies still sometimes end badly because of distance. At the same time, the forest that the interior holds is one of the last large intact tropical forest blocks remaining in South America. Its value, ecological, hydrological, climatic, biological, is measurable and enormous. It provides what scientists call ecosystem services at a global scale. It absorbs carbon in volumes relevant to climate systems far beyond Guyana's borders, and many of the communities within it are its most effective stewards, having managed it sustainably across time periods that dwarf any government conservation program. This creates a genuine tension. The interior communities are not obligated to be conservation assets for the rest of the world's convenience. They are people with legitimate needs and rights to development. But development, as it has proceeded elsewhere in the Amazon, has a documented trajectory that is difficult to dispute. How Guyana navigates this, whether indigenous land rights are genuinely protected, whether development serves interior communities or simply extracts past them. Whether the forests that define the country's interior survive the economic pressure now surrounding them. These are the questions that will define what Guyana actually becomes. The answers are not settled. They are being decided now, often in places too remote for outside attention to notice. Evening in the interior of the day ends differently here than it does almost anywhere else. When the light drops in the interior of Guyana, it drops completely. There are no city lights diffusing into the sky, no distant glow on the horizon, no sound of road traffic carrying across the dark. What remains is the forest itself, which does not sleep but changes register. The daytime sounds of birds replaced gradually by frogs, insects, and the occasional distant cry of something larger moving through the dark canopy. Inside a community house, a fire or a lamp, the smell of cassava bread, of smoked fish, of wood smoke carried sideways by a slight evening breeze. Conversation in languages that most of the world will never hear. Children moving between adults. Someone checking whether the rain is coming or passing. Someone else talking about the river level, the next supply trip, the animal tracks seen earlier near the garden. The business of tomorrow is already somewhere in the room. Outside, the forest is incomprehensibly alive, every square meter of it occupied by something with its own urgent agenda. All of it continuing exactly as it would whether a human settlement existed nearby or not. That is the humbling reality of the Guyanese interior. The forest is not here for people. People are here in the forest. That distinction sounds simple. Grasping it fully changes how you think about what wilderness means, what civilization costs, and what it might mean to live in genuine relationship with a place rather than simply on top of it. Most of the world has forgotten that.